Hey everybody, it's Erin from the Impatient Gardener. Hey, so today I'm going to be planting a couple of trees. One is going to be a bare root tree and the other one's going to be a bald and burlap tree. And I thought I'd show you how I plant both of those trees and also maybe deal with a few of the tree planting misconceptions that are out there. You know, the way that we used to be told to plant trees is actually now not the way you're supposed to plant trees anymore, although not everyone has necessarily wisened up to that whole idea. So there's a lot of information out there. I mean, I would say, since there is so much sort of confusing information out there, do a little bit of research and see what the best way is that you think after you look at the research. And I'm going to put some links in the description to some of the papers that have been written about sort of the new way of planting trees, because there's a lot of things we've been doing that aren't wrong, and there's a lot of things that I don't think anyone ever told you to do, but people have been doing incorrectly because maybe they saw it. You know, one of the things you need to understand is that when you're planting a tree, you're planting a plant for the long term. So sometimes some of the things you do in the near term may cause a small amount of stress to a tree. It's all about the long-term scenario, because otherwise, if you don't do some of these things, you will end up with a dead tree in 10 years or less. And what's the point of that? Trees are expensive and they aren't really all that great for a while anyways. So here's the bare root tree, and this is where we're putting it, which is kind of in our wooded area, but let me show you why we're putting it right here. So here's the view more or less from our living room, if you look out the windows. And if you look behind me, you'll see a house, and that woods that's behind me there has, like most of the trees in our neighborhood, been highly affected by emerald ash borer, and our neighbors are taking out a lot of those trees, which is great. You kind of have to. They do become a problem with power lines and things like that, and they're going to be doing some replanting. But in the meantime, you can see we have a pretty clear view of them, and that's different for us because for a long time this was well blocked. We also had to take down this giant tree right here. This was an enormous ash, and this was completely dead. Actually, it's a really good thing we took it out. The logs were hollow inside. It could have caused a big problem. So, as you can see, we want a little bit of screening. I don't need a full screen, and I don't really mind the extra sun that we have here right now. So I don't really want to put an evergreen here, but something to just distract your eye a little bit. I don't need, I'm happy to see another house, but I don't want it to be the focal point. So we're going to plant this tree right here, and we have been scoping this area out for quite some time, and what we do is we put a stake in the ground and then we look at it from various places, and we've sort of landed here. Around me we've got a beech tree right here, a beautiful maple tree right here, and an oak right here, and hopefully all those trees will live very happy lives. So that's why this is kind of a nice spot for a short tree with some four-season interest to it. So a couple of thoughts about bare root trees. First of all, for some reason I never used to like to plant bare root trees, and I don't know why that is. I don't know if I had some kind of misconception or I thought it was wrong or hard on a tree, but now I'm actually of the mind that if you can plant trees bare root, it's the best way to plant a tree because they are going straight into your native soil. You can check the roots really carefully to make sure the roots are not circling. You can cut off any bad roots. Frankly, I like planting bare root trees, especially when we're planting in our wooded areas, because it's way easier to dig the hole. There's a lot of roots that run through here, and it's much easier to dig a hole for a bare root tree than for a giant bald and burlap tree. Also, they're a lot easier to manage. I can carry this tree around all day long by myself, and I would not be able to do that if this tree were bald and burlap. Now, one thing I want to say about this tree, so this is a serviceberry. This is Autumn Brilliance serviceberry, and I ordered 2 of these through a fundraiser. There was a group doing a fundraiser, and all of the money goes to planting more trees in cities, so why not, right? I picked up these trees yesterday, and the one thing I will say about them is these trees should not look like this. Really, when you plant a bare root tree, you want to do it when it's dormant. You don't want leaves on them. This one actually, because serviceberries flower before they leaf out, this one actually has flowers on it. That's not optimal, but I pre-ordered these trees and that's what I got. I mean, if I were going to a nursery to pick out bare root trees, I would not pick one out that was already flowering. So one of the really nice things about bare root trees is that you can see the roots and you can make sure that there's no weird circling roots. If any, I'm pretty happy with how the roots on this tree look. If any of these roots were really heavily bent or girdling around one another, I would cut one of those out. What you want is the roots to be able to spread out easily. One of the really nice things about bare root trees is that it's very easy to see where the root flare is. And that's not necessarily where the soil line is, which you can see here, which often the root flare is where the roots actually meet the trunk. So you're going to be looking at, on a tree like this, you're going to be looking at, you know, planting it to about there in terms of the top of the soil. Don't bury them too deep. That is a good way to wreck a tree. So that's one of the most common problems that people have with trees. When you dig your hole to plant a tree, you want the hole to be twice as wide as the root ball or the roots are, but not any deeper. In the old days, people used to say a $10 hole for a $5 plant or something like that. The idea being amend your soil really, really well and make it this beautiful, wonderful soil. And it turns out that is all wrong and you're not supposed to do that. The problem with that is that if you make the soil perfect but completely different from what's around it, you create this lovely little pocket that these roots have no reason or ever want to leave. So what happens is that's when you start getting circling roots and you don't get a great root system, and that's how you end up with a tree that doesn't last that long. So once I start to get it sort of, by the way, tree planting is a lot easier when you've got a second person to sort of hold it still and check to make sure everything's looking good. But if you don't have a second person, sometimes you just gotta get these trees in the ground. So that's how it goes. So once I sort of start to get it firmed in, I step back and make sure that it's nice and straight, which I don't think it is. I think it needs to go a little bit like this, and firm it down a little bit if you need to. And then what I like to do is give it a really good, at this point, give it a really good drink of water, because that's gonna help settle the soil around it, and then I'll keep backfilling the soil on top of it. So a word about firming in. You know, what you wanna do is make sure that everything's sort of tight and that the roots are well set, and mostly that there's good soil to root contact so that you don't have air pockets. But I don't believe in going nuts on jamming on that and stomping on that. I don't think that that's good, particularly if you have soil that tends to get easily compacted, a highly clay soil, which I don't have, but I don't love the idea of just like stomping the crap out of it. So make sure it's firmly seated in there, but I don't go nuts on this. So a rule of thumb with plants is, or when you're planting trees, is if you have doubts, plant them higher rather than lower. A lot of times the soil settles underneath them, so suddenly you end up with a tree that you planted at the right spot, but it actually ends up too low. So you take some time with that. Make sure you like where you're seeing that soil meet that. And if anything, err on the side of being too high. Honestly, you can always add some soil later if you need to. Okay, let's talk about staking. First off, do not stake a tree unless you have to. It is much better for the tree to be able to flop around. This builds a nice strong trunk, and that's what you want. So if you have a smaller tree or a tree that's not in a windy area, you're not worried about damage with it, don't stake it at all. Second of all, if you are going to stake it, only stake it for about a year and then take the stakes off. Only thing you're trying to accomplish with staking is keeping the roots from rocking so that they stay firm and they can get established nicely. So when I got this tree, each tree came with 2 of these huge, I think these are actually like fence posts, and a whole kit with wire. And how they want you to stake is to stick one of these on either side and then put a strap around this and pull it in each direction. And that is not how I'm going to stake this tree. So what I prefer to do is put in one stake, and if you can put it so that it's on the side of the prevailing wind, if you have one of those, what I like to do is drive it into the ground at an angle and then attach it way down here. Because again, you want this top to be flopping around. You don't want the roots to be flopping around. So this idea of staking up here is completely unnecessary, and then it causes all this like rubbing on the tree. And sometimes I see people stake where they hook straps around branches and then pull them down. I think that's the worst. I mean, that just causes all sorts of issues, and then invariably they forget to take those off. So then what you want to do is get a strap. Now they make tree straps particularly for this, but the idea is that you cross it so that the trunk never rubs, these two things never come in contact. There is a layer of material between the two of them. All right, so you notice when I mulched, I did not pile up a giant base. If you take one thing away from this video, make it be no more mulch volcanoes. And I know you've seen these. In fact, you've probably seen these in your city with your city trees planted like this. Don't do it. It's all wrong. It will absolutely damage and eventually probably kill your tree. In fact, I like to do the opposite of a mulch volcano, where I sort of create a nice thick ring around the middle, but you want to mulch out, and this is the minimum I would mulch for this tree. You usually want to kind of mulch what the canopy is. So as this grows, I will mulch out farther, but I create a bit of a ridge to help kind of keep the water in there. And then of course, oh, and the mulch I'm using is just wood chip mulch. When we have trees cut down, we have our arborists leave the chips from the branches, and that's what I use. It's free mulch, it's great stuff. It breaks down really nice in your garden. I like to water really well that first week, almost as well the second week, and then after in about that third week or next, I mean, it all depends on what kind of weather you're having, but you can start going to a once a week watering, and you really should make sure that your tree gets at least an inch of water every week throughout the year, and just check on it during dry spells. This first year is so crucial for trees and shrubs. If you get them established this first year, it's kind of hands off, so you don't have to worry about it. You just have to worry about it that first year. Now let's go get that other tree. So the next tree I'm planting is CORNUS KOUSA SATOMI. That's a pink flowering dogwood. It will get lovely, lovely pink flowers, well, bracts, but they look like flowers. So to most of us, they're flowers on it. Also, right now, it's a very upright tree, but as it grows, it'll get a little broader. And that's a habit that I will encourage through pruning over the years, because I kind of want a lower, broader tree. It gets really beautiful dark foliage, kind of burgundy foliage in fall, and pretty big leaves on it. The leaves are pretty kind of a shiny green, and they sort of hang. There's a little bit of a layered effect, although not as much as some of the other dogwoods. So this is a balled and burlap tree. Ironically, this tree is significantly smaller than the other tree that I just planted that was bare root, and this tree is not yet leafed out, unlike the other one. So, but now I'm going to show you what you do with a balled and burlap tree. The same thing would apply for a containerized tree, by the way. So this is a little bit more involved, and this is the part where a lot of people are going to say that I'm completely nuts, but bear with me and I'll tell you why I do what I'm doing here. Okay guys, so first of all, what I'm about to tell you about here refers to trees that are relatively small. If you have a giant tree that's coming in with a tree spade, that has to be planted by a machine, you are not going to be able to do this with it. So, and ideally you should do this with it, but you can't do that with those big trees. So let's say this is a tree that could be planted by like 2 people. So the first thing you want to do, regardless of what any nursery has ever told you, is you want to get rid of all of this. Get rid of all this. Get rid of this burlap. That is bad news. One of the problems with burlap is that it can wick moisture away. So even if you have to leave, if you're planting a tree that's so big that you can't get to the bottom of it, even if you have to leave it on there, at the very least, cut away all the burlap off the top, because it'll just wick moisture out of there. But ideally, you get rid of this burlap altogether. If it's in a cage, if there's a cage around it, get rid of the cage too, if you can. I know. This is not what you've been told. Okay, so can you see this soil that's on here? This is super clay soil. That's common for when you buy a tree, because the other soil doesn't stick to the roots. It's very hard to make a root ball with that. This is the exact opposite of what I have in my garden. So if I were to plunk this in my yard the way it is right now, this tree would have a very hard time expanding its roots and getting really well established, because this is nothing like what it's going to be growing in whatsoever. So the first thing I'm going to do is get rid of this burlap, and then I'm going to very carefully start removing this soil. Okay, so you do want to be careful when you do this because you could hurt the roots. But so then I take the hose and I start sort of soaking. This is a messy deal, guys. I start sort of soaking away the soil that's on the roots. All right, guys, so look at this. This is really telling. So you saw that root structure on that bare root tree. Look at this. This is all the roots for this big tree. These have all been trimmed and cut to be, I mean, there's hardly anything there. This is not good news. This is bad news, actually. But the other problem that we have right here is we've got some roots that are crossing each other. Crossing isn't as big of a deal, but you can correct it. What is concerning is, see this root right here? This root has taken a turn and it goes way over here, but it is so, see there's like a girdling root in there. That's not optimal, but I'm not sure how that can be corrected. Sometimes you can cut these out. What I'm trying to correct is right here we've got some issues. I hate to do this because this tree is lacking roots to begin with, but you know, honestly you have to do the best you can. There. Okay, so if we make, so this cut, hopefully make a nice sort of clean cut here, which is easier said than done. There. Okay. There. Now I've cut this root that's wrapping around right here, and hopefully a new root will grow out from there. Everything else is just, it's not exactly going the right direction, but it's not going the wrong direction. So this water that's in here, if you can use it to water in the tree, that's not a bad thing because there's all sorts of good bacteria in here that can help. I'll see if I can get this over there without making a giant mess though. Hey guys, a couple of quick notes about bare rooting a tree like this. First of all, this tree is dormant, essentially. There's no leaves on it yet. So it's the right time to do this kind of tree. If you're planting in the heat of summer, if you're planting a tree that's fully leafed out, I don't recommend taking it all the way down to bare roots. It can be super stressful on a plant. What I like to do, last year, actually, you can check the video that I made, and I'll put a link to it, when I planted the hornbeam hedge last year, which was a summer project. And what I did was I essentially washed off some of the soil off of those roots once they were in the hole. And what that did was allow me to just see the roots, and then if there was any crossing roots, I could see those and I could nip those off there. Anything beyond that, I think is really stressful on the plant. So do know that it's really something you have to do early in the year, and this is stressful things. You really have to make, if there's one thing you make sure you stay on top of this, make sure you stay on top of the watering, because there's just, as you can tell, there are just very few roots to keep this tree alive. Now that it's essentially bare root though, there's really no difference in planting it than there was to the bare root tree that I planted before. So let me just show you where I'm going to plant it, and then we'll quick go through it, but I don't need to talk you through it again. Well, I apologize for the sun here, guys. It's super bright middle of the day, which is not optimal timing for making a video. Frankly, it's not optimal time for planting a tree either, but sometimes you got to just do these things when you have the time. So this is the garden that's right off the patio. This is the door that we use the most often. There's this path that we use to get out to the garage. And I'm redoing this whole bed. Not everything is coming out, but I'm rearranging some things. I'm adding some things. The only thing I'm going to do different with this tree than I did with the other one is I did find some mycorrhizal fungi in the garage, and I'm going to apply that to the roots. I would say that the science on mycorrhizal fungi is kind of all over the place, but it certainly doesn't hurt. So I would say with this tree, we need to just go with, let's try it and see what happens. So I'm gonna go grab that tree.